guys, I'm Nubia. I am here because I'm going to answer one of the questions that I get frequently asked, which is, did I enjoy law school? And I think a lot of people doing their research and trying to determine whether they're going to go to school frequently hear rumors and myths about how much people dislike law school, how horrible it is, and so they want to know other people's experiences. And I want to be really honest with you about my experience. I started law school in 2007. I did a 3-year program full-time here in the city in Chicago, and I hated it. I hated it. And it's not a knock on the school. I think it would have been a bad experience regardless of where I went. It might have even been worse in other settings. So it was just the nature of law school overall that was very difficult for me, and I'm going to explain why, because now with the gift of time I've been able to kind of review my experience, and I kind of have honed into the main reasons why it was a bad time for me. And the reality is that it will probably be a bad time for most people. And I don't say that to discourage anyone, because it's not so bad that I think it's insurmountable. It's not so bad that I think people shouldn't enroll. But it is something I think people should be aware of, because just by nature, law school is difficult and most people dislike it. And so you shouldn't go with that in mind, so that if you're experiencing something similar to what I'm about to describe, you're able to recognize it, and maybe you can make changes, you can address it so that things turn out better for you. So the main 3 things that I really disliked about law school and that made my law school very difficult, the first one would have to be the adjusting to the new culture. So in every industry, there's cultural norms and business practices that everyone's kind of expected to know, and the law is no different. But the law is actually probably more traditional, more conservative than most other fields. And I knew that there were certain expectations as a professional that I needed to follow. For example, when we go to court, we wear suits, things like that. I'm not an idiot. I understood that was something we had to do, and I try to follow it, but it just never felt authentic to me. Putting on a suit at the beginning really felt like I was putting on a costume rather than just a piece of clothing that felt natural and comfortable. And so it was little things like that, like not knowing the procedures and the expectations, the kind of like stumbling through, that made me really feel like an outsider and ultimately kind of like an imposter. And it was really difficult to adjust to that, because I went to law school very capable and competent and strongly believing in my intelligence and skills, and I would put that kind of focus on like the studying and the material, but when it came time to do like the networking and understanding the connections that had to be made and how we were supposed to behave, suddenly I was being told, the way I dressed, the way I spoke, the way my hair looked, the way I waved my hands around when I spoke, all of that was wrong and bad, and that it wasn't part of this new world, and I had to adjust. And that was really difficult, because it was essentially a rejection of me. Of who I am and who the people that look like me were. And so it was just kind of a mind meld that I had to kind of take in, realign, and refocus. And for a long time, it was difficult for me. I just didn't feel like I was really part of this group of people. And I would see students like talking to professors and talking to attorneys, and I just felt like there is no real connection with me and with them. And I would think maybe I'll just get my degree and I'll just figure it out, not understanding that making that connections was just equally as important. And so I missed out on a big chunk of kind of like the benefit of law school at the beginning because of that. And for people who grew up with parents who are professionals, you might think, well, how could you not feel accustomed? How could that be? But the reality is that, I read an article a while ago that said for you to think about, like, who taught you to shake a hand? Who told you that was a business norm? And maybe you learned it from TV, or maybe you learned it from your parents. And the difference between that is knowing the language fluently and knowing it enough to just kind of get by. And I was obviously in the camp of just enough to get by. And there's a world of difference when you know it fluently. And I think for those of us who are from lower socioeconomic brackets, who are immigrants, who are first gen, who do not have access to all of these other professionals, it can be a real time. It can take a long time to get accustomed to this and to kind of realign yourself so that you're kind of going with the flow. So that was one of the more difficult aspects of law school for me. The other part was that I was very poor. I and I don't mean that lightly. And I don't mean it in the way that like, oh, much, it's like a struggling college student or grad student that doesn't have enough money, or like you can only eat ramen. Like, I don't mean it that way. I mean it in the sense of really, truly, there was no money, and I almost couldn't go to law school because I couldn't put together $250 to pay my deposit. My mom didn't have it. My dad had already paid the first half of my deposit. I was just kind of just drowning. I just didn't have it. I just didn't have the financial help that some other people have. And for a long story, other reason, I wasn't able to work that summer, so I didn't have the money, and my family didn't have the money. And so it was very hard to start law school in such a kind of financial uncertainty. It was so uncertain that I wasn't even sure I was going to be able to finish my first year. I kind of just went in thinking like, okay, well, I'll have enough money to pay my rent for this many months, and hopefully it kind of all shakes out. That was the plan, which was no plan. And so even with law school loans, which you end up getting and helps pay for your rent, you don't get them right away. And so it took like a few weeks into the year before I was able to get all of my law school money. So I was behind in my readings because I didn't have enough money to buy all my books. I don't think I bought my statute book for civil procedure until October, so that put me behind. I had to find a part-time job, which obviously helped pay for my rent, but then I didn't have as much time to study, which it was like a constant reminder of just how much I was lacking. And it was difficult. It was difficult to get over that hump 1L year. It was just a reminder, and it just kind of impacted me in lots of different ways, just that financial insecurity. And it wasn't just the stress of myself, but the stress of knowing that back home my mom was struggling, my brother was struggling, because he was still very young and living with her at the time. So it was just overall hard, very hard to not have the financial security of just knowing you have enough money to pay your rent, that you'll be able to like get enough hours at work to make sure your rent is paid. That was just really hard on top of a very difficult program. And so that was one thing that really made law school difficult. What I want to mention is just the environment overall is really difficult to get accustomed to. So I don't want to knock my school because I still participate in alumni events, I still talk to students, I still see them as interns, and I'm really impressed with the turnaround the school has done. It's really it's such an about face in the idea of them leaning into racial justice and the Jesuit teachings and offering students things that I did not have access to. I am really happy about that. But when I was there, overall the environment was just bad. It was just really bad. And I think in general in most law schools you're exposed to students who are very secluded, who have not had a lot of life experience. Like maybe yes, they've studied in Europe, but they've never interacted with a person of color, and so they'll make statements about women, about certain races, about certain demographics that are offensive, and then the idea is that we're supposed to be the ones with thicker skins, right? Because why are you so offended all the time? Like that's like the thing. And so that's hard to take, those little like paper cuts all the time, like the comments. I had a friend who was asked if her parents were legal. I had another friend who a professor was like harassing her. I myself was called a liar twice by two different people, 2 different years, for stupid things because I was a woman of color taking on leadership roles. And for some reason, I think that really, in hindsight, made people question whether I should be there and why I was there, and trying to figure out a way to kind of like stick it to me to remind me that I really didn't belong. And so that can be really difficult. It's difficult to have to expose yourself to that. It's difficult to have to rise above it. It's difficult to, keep going and do what you're supposed to do when all this other stuff is happening. So the environment in law schools are often, they just feel adversarial, and it's like something you just kind of want to get away from as soon as possible. And I think that's because overall law school is made to be and to feel icky and adversarial. The professors, they're like sassy and like will If they do the Socratic method, often many of them will say mean things if you don't say what they're expecting you to say, if you misspeak, if you cite something wrong. Even when you're right, they might still say something sarcastic. And that's just kind of like the nature of the beast. It's really gross. But like, you are expected to like go through it. Like, really think about it. What other program are you like paying money to attend, and you're like supposed to be okay with a professor like basically calling you stupid in front of like your peers? My Civ Pro professor, if someone got the answer right, he would look at them and say, a broken clock is right twice a day, and then move on to someone else. How is that okay to, like, how's that okay to do? It's not. It makes the students feel horrible, and for whatever reason, the powers that be have decided that that's going to be what most law schools are like. So I think you need to go in, you should visit a course, you should see how the students feel before you make the decision about where you want to go. Now, having experienced all of that, knowing how much I hated those 3 years of my program, do I regret going? And the answer is absolutely not. I do not regret it. I'm glad I did it because I ended up with my law license, my law degree, which let me get my license. And that was my ultimate goal. My goal has been to be a lawyer, not to be a law student. So I had to go through those 3 years of like shit to end up with my law degree. And I have had a very successful career helping hundreds of people stabilize their lives in a way that I would not be able to do without my law degree. So I'm really thankful that I was able to earn it. There's certainly lots of things that I could have done better, and there's certainly lots of things that the law school could have done better, but overall, like, I'm happy I did it. I'm happy I'm done with it. But I would do it again. I would do it again because this is the profession for me, and this is the work I'm supposed to be doing, and I could not imagine doing anything else or helping people in the way that I have in some other type of capacity. So yeah, it was worth it, but I hated it. I hated it. So take that for what you will. I don't know if that's helpful, or if it scared you, or if it has, solidified whether or not you're gonna go. But I think it's important that you understand just kind of the visceral reaction people get as to why law school isn't the best for them. But if you go in again with an open mind and understanding of what difficulties may lie ahead, you can foresee them, you can realign, and you can maybe avoid them. That's really my hope. And I think overall, and I hope overall, is that you still plan to go, and you'll hate it for 3 years, but you'll get through it, and then you'll also be using your law degree to help other people. So if you have any questions about anything, I'm always here to help. Please leave your comments below. Like, subscribe, share, everything you're supposed to do. And then I will talk to you in the next video.